Today, my dad and I are here at Chickamauga Battlefield in North Georgia, and we're here to attend a ranger-guided program to learn all about Reconstruction after the Civil War. That's coming up next.
Late in the afternoon, September 19th, 1863, the final phase of the battle of that day begins. That evening, Major General Patrick Cleburne's division is ordered to make an assault against the Union forces over here, in the woods just over here. The sun begins to set that day. Cleburne's division moves out, moves into the fighting, and ends up being an illustrative reasons of why you don't see fighting at night during the Civil War. Bad things happen. Chaos ensues. Cases of friendly fire dominate. And in one case, not too far off from here, the 33rd Alabama Infantry is advancing in the battle. Their adjutant, Adjutant Moore, out in front of the regiment, trying to encourage the men onward, is killed when some of his own men fire into his back. That will then necessitate the promotion of another young man to the office of Adjutant of the 33rd Alabama. And that's this young man. His name is W.J. Milner. Basically lived in the area that is now Birmingham, Alabama. Milner is going to become, like many other men on this battlefield, countless numbers of men on this battlefield, is going to become involved in a stronger, harsher kind of resistance to Reconstruction. And this will be probably one of the ugliest chapters in American history. W.J. Milner will become a member of what becomes known as the Ku Klux Klan. Milner and other young men will take this out. Their way of dealing with the world of the newly emancipated African Americans is to resist it tooth and nail. And Milner, later in life, of all places, will give a speech to the Tampa, Florida Rotary Club in the early 1900s, and he'll note, no historian has portrayed or can fittingly portray the plight of the Confederate soldier when after his fight to finish for the right of the self-government, notice there, part of that lost cause, the fight for self-government, he returned to the desolation which was his home. If anyone needed a helping hand, it was surely he. And I think that is so tremendously ironic. You now have 4 million people who had been enslaved, who had been denied being human beings. They're the ones that need assistance, but he's saying that now the former Confederate soldiers are the ones who needed the most help. The help which our conquerors sent to us was a flock of vultures, of whom Honorable Jeremiah Black of Pennsylvania, a former Attorney General of the United States, said, they contrived a method by which to insert their felonious talons into the hearts of unborn babies. They are known to history as carpetbaggers. A tribe of odious memory. Among those carpetbaggers were the Freedmen's Bureau agents, who had the authority and exerted absolute control over Negroes. They, like others with whom they consorted, were usually men wholly without principle and were solely for the enrichment of themselves. Their purposes were to prevent any harmony or cooperation between the races and produce between them as much friction as possible. With this end, they corralled their deluded wards into midnight assemblies where most vicious thoughts were instilled into their minds, producing in due course the inevitable and intended consequences. Every act of violence, every outrage that could be chronicled as occurring in rebel territory and was reported to Washington, whether true or untrue mattered not, served to enhance the standing in Washington of those in charge at that point involved, and it was so easy for them to collect any kind and amount of testimony wanted, lest I won't be thought to have exaggerated the foregoing statement. To one knowing the Negro character is sufficient to leave to the imagination the quality and thought and desire generated in their minds by this teaching. It is it was also needless to add that the whites were not to protect their women from insult and outrage. Out of this soil blossomed the Invisible Empire, which was a nickname of the Ku Klux Klan. Better known as the Ku Klux Klan, to General George W. Gordon of Tennessee, I think it is due to credit for the conception of the plan and its preparation. The organization was perfected at a secret meeting at Nashville, and General Nathan Bedford Forrest was made head of the Klan. So Milner extols and kind of carries forward the whole idea. Basically, he's saying that, all of the blacks in the South were perfectly fine with being at the lower tier until all of a sudden these carpetbaggers had to show up and start stirring up trouble. Because nobody, these African Americans couldn't possibly want to be on equal footing with white people. They had to be stirred up. That was part of this mindset that Milner has. But he brings then a name forward that most of us hear. You hear a lot about Nathan Bedford Forrest. That Nathan Bedford Forrest was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. Nathan Bedford Forrest was not the founder. However, he was the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. But there were several other men involved in the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. Originally started out with those 6 guys over there in Giles County, Tennessee, who formed the group. But then, at the same time, all across the South, there's all these other organizations kind of doing the same, with that same ideas being formed. They'll take on names like Knights of the White Camellia, the Pale Faces, the White League, and they'll pop up in all these states, and they'll all get lumped together as Ku Klux. But Ku Klux Klan tended to only initially be this one group in Tennessee, but then all the others will be folded into it. But among them, George W. Gordon, as Milner called him, General George W. Gordon. George W. Gordon is actually on this battlefield Colonel George W. Gordon, commanding the 11th Tennessee Infantry in General Preston Smith's brigade of Frank Cheatham's division. It was that night attack that saw Milner's promotion to adjutant of 33rd Alabama was occurring. At the same time, a gap had opened up in the Confederate line behind us. And moving in support is Preston Smith's brigade. Unbeknownst to them, they moved through the gap and ended up being in the front line. And it leads to a little incident in the woods about 200 yards behind us. There, General Smith accidentally rides into Union lines and is killed, shot at point blank range, being the first Confederate general to die in the Battle of Chickamauga. And in the darkness of all of this, George W. Gordon, one of the youngest colonels in Confederate service, is leading his men, seeing this incident. Here in the chaos of night, he understands the fear that night can bring, the confusion, not only because it caused problems, but Union soldiers are bumbling into Union lines, so the night can be your friend, but it can also be your enemy. So George W. Gordon now, in 1866, is going to become involved with the formation of this new organization that still haunts us till this day. That being the Ku Klux Klan. Gordon would be 30 years old in 1867, so he's a colonel at 26 here on the battlefield. Although he is a general by the end of the war. He is a man known for, born in Pulaski County, so there's the connection for him. He's going to basically be the man responsible for the style, organizations, and tactics of this newly formed paramilitary organization. And so he will be the guy that writes the bylaws. He's the guy that writes the rules and regulations of the Ku Klux Klan. And ironically, those part of their credo starts, "This is an institution of chivalry, humanity, mercy, and patriotism, embodying in its genius and its principles all of its chivalric in conduct, noble in sentiment, generous in manhood and patriotic in purpose, its peculiar objects being, first, to protect the weak, the innocent, and the defenseless from the indignities, wrongs, and outrages of the lawless and violent and brutal, to relieve the injured and oppressed, to succor the suffering and unfortunate, and especially the widows and orphans of Confederate soldiers. And of course, how do you go about doing that? You turn on all of the African Americans and carpetbaggers and scallywags that you can. What will follow after the establishment of the Ku Klux Klan is a reign of terror all across the South, targeting schools that have been established by the Freedmen's Bureau for African Americans, but also targeting any African American who might be getting out of line. In other words, standing up for their rights, which were brought in with the 14th Amendment, which gave citizenship to African Americans. So they're going to combat this, and ultimately Congress will ultimately investigate this, and there'll be 12 volumes of nothing but listing all of these incidents. Just to give you all a taste of the character of this, some of these are online. And this is just but, pull down the sheet here, an idea. May 18th, victim, Badger Hawkins, attacker, Bill McWhirter, County, Chattooga County, Georgia. Put rope around his neck and hung him to a tree, threatening all the time to kill him, but let him go without injury much cause to make him confess that he had some money that had been lost. Victim, Alfred Wilkie. Attacker, Robert Shears. Where? Whitfield County. Injuries. Drew a pistol and threatened to shoot him. Cause, none. Victim, Dewey Hurd. Attacker, Van Caves. County, Gordon. Injury, struck him with a rock when he tried to escape, fired 3 times at him. Cause, none. And you have this thing repeated over and over and over till you filled up 12 volumes of books. Activities like this, intimidation, African American men move out to try to register other African Americans to vote, since they now are having the right to vote. The Klan would come in and kill these men, or run them off. Typical Klan act, their modus operandi, so to speak, would be you would get a warning, and it would give you time and date. You had this much time to get out of here. If you were a white man, if it was a black man. So this is what's going to, this lawlessness, this terror is going to start affecting elections, because initially, you know, one of the things African Americans took great pride in was the fact that now they could vote, they could have a say, so they could have representation. They're going to do this, have one election to do this, and afterwards, it's all going down. The threats and intimidation are going to be just far too great. And of course, the Klan is going to be represented in every one of the southern states that had seceded, but also now the border states, and even a few points in the north where resentment had been toward African Americans. That's one thing sometimes folks don't really realize is that racism did not just exist in the South. It existed both north and south. But with the 1860s will be this struggle until the election of Ulysses S. Grant as president in 1868. Now, with Grant coming in, you'll have, he will eventually pass in 1871 called the Enforcement Act, also nicknamed the Ku Klux Act, where now the Army is going to become involved. They're going to send troops in to deal, military troops in to deal with the Klan. They're going to treat it for what it was, a terrorist organization. And with this passage of this act, Ku Klux Klan is going to act real quick. They're going to disband. Formal announcement, it's done. Klan no longer exists. And it's still going to go on, but now it's going to dissipate now. But part of for this new Ku Klux Klan Act is these clandestine type things are going to be banned, but masks are gone, the regalia's gone. You know, if you're caught doing this, you're going to be treated this way. And so they're going to adapt now. Now they're going to start doing it without hoods over their head. They're going to, now how do they now adapt? No longer the night tactics. How are they going to now adapt? They're going to come out in broad daylight. And now you're going to see the rise of other organizations. White League, the Red Shirts, many times organizations, state militias that will become involved.